Okay, so since I made the Secret of Shadow Ranch barbecue beans, I've not been able to stop thinking about that recipe because it seemed like it could have been so good and it almost was. So I wanted to fix that. So what I'm going to do today is go through and I've made some changes to the recipe that I think will be for the better. So we're going to give those a try and compare side by side. I've saved a little bit of the original recipe and I'm going to compare it with my updated recipe to see what we get. So let's try this out. Okay, bear with me. My kitchen doesn't exactly have the best angles for this, but a lot of it's going to be on the stove. So what I'm going to start out doing is the last recipe ended up having a very hard, thick layer of excess butter on the top. So when I went to serve it, I actually, after refrigerating it, had to pull away the excess butter, which ended up in me having kind of a reserve of butter off to the corner of the dish that I'd been using. So I'm up for a midnight snack, and I thought what better to have than some of these leftover beans. I had a little for breakfast today, but I needed to show you how insane these are. This on top is solid butter. So it comes off in chunks like this. I have a little pile going over here that I seriously think I could fry something in because it is so incredibly thick. But on the bright side of that, it makes it a lot easier for me to skim all of that grease, I guess, off the top, so they're not quite as runny when I eat them. But that being said, the recipe said that they could be eaten hot or cold, and with all of this butter, there's absolutely no way to eat them cold because it has such big chunks of butter in it that it makes it gritty, and like the spoon is coated in this cold congealed butter. So not sure I could recommend that. So I'm going to weigh the excess butter. I've got my scale here, and we're going to zero that out with this dish on top so that I can pull the butter into that. Let's go ahead. I'm going to pull that butter. There's maybe a little bit of bean juice on there, but I don't think that'll hurt anything. It's got that fun, bright orange color. Probably from the ketchup. I have 4.8 ounces of excess butter. So I am going to pour those into a warmed frying pan and then melt that down. I have minced a medium onion. So we're going with less onion than we did last time. I minced that up. Then once that extra butter melts down, I'm going to dump the onion into that butter and saute that up. Ooh, got going right away. The onions are fragrant now. They're starting to soften a bit, so I'm going to give them just another minute on here, and then I'm going to go ahead and just put all of the ingredients in the pan and mix them that way. All right, so you can see they've got kind of a nice clear color. You can definitely smell them. Now, if I had more patience, I would definitely let this butter caramelize on the onions, give it a nice sweet flavor, because I am cutting back the sugar on this recipe significantly. I'm going to go from a full cup of sugar, so 3/4 cups brown sugar and 1/4 cup white sugar. I am just using 1/2 cup of brown sugar. So I'm going to go ahead and pour that in. I have 1/4 cup ketchup. Then I'm still using the 2 cans of pork and beans by Campbell's. So that totals 22 ounces. The original recipe only called for 20 ounces, but I was unable to find beans and pork and beans in that quantity. So I don't think the other 2 ounces will hurt anything. Mix that up just a little bit because the brown sugar tended to clump when I did this before. So I actually think keeping this on a low heat and simmering it for a minute with all of the ingredients will help melt down those chunks of brown sugar. Next, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of the ground mustard. I'm keeping this quantity the same from the original recipe. I felt like playing with the quantities of sweet and savory wasn't a good experiment, so I'm just going to mess with the sweet quantities this time, and the butter, obviously. Then we have 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. So measure that out. And again, this is the same quantity as the original recipe. This is actually looking really good. And then I'm going to go ahead and transfer this into a baking dish. I've got my oven set for 400 degrees. I'll put it in there for 90 minutes and then check on it. Okay, so I baked the beans after cooking them on the stove for 45 minutes, covered with just some tin foil. Then I uncovered them and continued baking them at 400 degrees uncovered for the second half. So looking at that, I actually think that was a little too high of heat, maybe for a little too long. So as you can see, it kind of blackened around the edges. So what I've done here, these are the original beans here. These were made the first time around based on the actual Nancy Drew recipe, followed as loyally as I can. As you can see, there is some grease that is pretty thick still along the edges. I went ahead and, because I think these should be served with hot dogs, I have like a Johnsonville brat that I was able to just kind of cut up. I put 4 pieces in each bowl. This is the new and improved recipe that I just made. You can see it's a little bit thicker. It doesn't tend to have as much of that grease along the edges, though the grease is still there. And again, it's just butter. Then I have the applesauce that Nancy suggests that we eat right along with this. So just to remind myself, I'm going to try the original beans by themselves. Good, very sweet, very oniony. Weird, it kind of gives me like a tingle at the back of my mouth. And these have been reheated in the microwave. I just popped them in for like a minute. All right, now let's try the updated recipe. The first thing I noticed about these are much thicker. The flavor is very different. I think cutting back the sugar on this was a great improvement. I don't feel like I'm missing anything without the butter. These are really nice. They have almost like a creamy quality to them. I like these a lot. Okay, now I'm going to try both of them just with a bite of the Johnsonville hot dog brat thing that I put in there. So I don't care for the brat with the original recipe. I think the saltiness of the brat is fighting somehow with the sweetness of the beans. I thought those would go really well together because they might balance each other out. But in fact, I think they fight. I almost didn't even taste the brat until just that saltiness at the end of the bite. Not a pleasant sensation. All right, so let's try it with the new and improved recipe. So just with a bit of brat with it. Those work together very nicely, but I think I may have been misinformed in my first opinion. I don't know that eating it along with the sausage in the same bite adds all that much to it. It is better than the first recipe with the sausage, but I don't think it's necessary. I would do it more as a side dish. Maybe eating those two things at the same time would be good, but I don't think that they necessarily need to go hand in hand. Now, the last time I did this, I really enjoyed the bite of beans that I had with the applesauce. So I had both of those
in the same bite. So let's do that again. Still really nice. That original recipe, the sweetness of the beans goes with the sweetness of the applesauce. I'm still loving that. All right, so let's see if the same holds true. All right, applesauce with the new and improved recipe here. Still pretty good. Not as good with the applesauce with the original one. So same deal. I think if you're going to do the updated recipe, it's better solo, maybe served alongside these things, not necessarily eaten with them at the same time. So we've all learned something here. If you're going to make beans, if you want to eat them with applesauce, make the original. If you want to eat them by themselves, make the new and improved. So hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And toodaloo, Nancy Drew.